Greetings, beloveds. This is Amy Caryn Johnson, the Earth Channel. Today, I would like to talk to you about the energy for the week of June 13th. And as always, I am going to be looking at tropical human design overlaid with the sidereal zodiac. And this is a unique way of putting this together. The reason I do so is because the sidereal zodiac shows us where the stars actually are, as the constellations are named. And the human design hexagrams, the 64 hexagrams, which come from the I Ching, align very well with in particular, the 8 that are found in what I call heart center. Human design often calls the G center. And those 8 gates are aligned with the solstices, equinoxes, and midpoints in between that represent the pagan holidays. And so that's just too perfect to change. So that's why I do it that way. I will share the chart with you. But you may also want to have your own chart ready to look at as I'm speaking today about this energy for this week. And I will also speak about the 1949 channel as well, continuing with that series. And that is part of the energy for this week as well. So if you need to run your chart, you may go to any free chart creator. The one I always recommend is humandesignamerica.com/chart. If you don't know your birth time, use noon. So the channel that is defined this week is the 1949, and it connects the root center, which is similar to the root chakra, and the emotional center again. We're probably going to end up covering all of the channels connected to the emotional center first in this series. But we did just have a solar eclipse last week, which I spoke about in last week's message, as well as the week before that. We are still in Mercury retrograde. And before that, we had the lunar eclipse for eclipse season, which I spoke of in the previous video before that. So lots of stuff going on right now. We are beginning to approach the summer solstice, but I will talk about that next week. And I just wanted to give my take on one thing that I heard another Vedic astrologer speak about. Vedic astrology typically uses the sidereal zodiac, and I do generally like and adhere to Vedic astrology, although what you see when I share charts with you is usually more reminiscent of the type of chart and zodiac that you see with human design, as well as sidereal or Western astrology. But this particular astrologer, I owe a gratitude to, because she helped teach me a lot about Vedic astrology and the sidereal zodiac. So I do appreciate her. However, she has gotten a lot of popularity because she has been pretty good at making predictions. And I'm not going to name her name here for you because I'm going to disagree with her here. And so you can take it or leave it as you wish. But she has noted that the south node of the moon, or Ketu as it is called in Vedic astrology, is currently aligning with the 9th gate, which is why I have that circled in the chart for this week as well. The 9th gate, although she does not speak about gates or human design, aligns with the star of Antares, and she does speak about that. And she calls it the star of war. I do not believe this is the star of war. Yes, there are many different deep and mysterious aspects associated with this star, with this constellation of Scorpio. I believe the nakshatra is Jyeshta, but I'm not going to focus on that today. if you're into nakshatras and that part of Vedic astrology. And I'd like to actually get into a little bit of information related to some of the things that starseeds may be interested in. The Antares star system was involved in the seeding and evolution of us on Earth, and we also may have had past lives there. However, it is not one of the main star systems from which people, starseeds, incarnate prior to coming to here to Earth. But there are several of us. I would count myself among one of them. I believe I've had past lives on other star systems as well, in addition to many here on Earth. And Antares in particular has been noted by other authors, other people who speak about this stuff more than I do, as influencing the creation of the I Ching by Lao Tzu. And Lao Tzu is a very mysterious person in his own right. Not a lot is known about him. And so I'm not going to get into what little is known. I'm just going to focus on this one particular thing, this one particular aspect, especially since it so closely relates to and affects what we're speaking about here from human design and using the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. So when you're looking at these hexagrams that represent gates in human design, the person who channeled the knowledge of human design into the world, his name was Lao Tzu, and that was in the 1980s. So he came much later than Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu did not create the I Ching or the 64 hexagrams. He just incorporated those into this particular overlay of astrology, this knowledge, and the orientation into these 9 centers, which are loosely related to the chakras. And I do have a series on the centers and how they relate to chakras if you'd like to check that out on my channel. But the I Ching by itself and the 64 hexagrams are, in case it's not abundantly obvious to you already, basically all of the different combinations and permutations of yin and yang lines. I know this isn't the traditional yin and yang symbol, but in the I Ching, a broken line, or a line that's in 2 pieces basically with a space in between, is considered to be a yin line. And a solid line that goes all the way across is considered to be a yang line. And so what you get with the 64 hexagrams is all the different possible combinations of those yin and yang lines. And it's really a beautiful, I think there's not only sacred geometry incorporated here, but also this wonderful pattern of duality and all the different ways that it can come together, and represents the beautiful diversity of our planet. And I'm going to get probably back to diversity a little bit in a moment. But I've mentioned before as well that the 64 hexagrams are a perfect parallel of the different codons that represent the amino acids, the building blocks for life. And so that's another way that this relates to diversity. So for Antares to have been so influential in the creation of the I Ching, I'm not saying it directly came from them, but they too, at their own time, went through the ascension process from a very polarized realm of dualism, or an illusion of separation. The story I have heard has to do with the fact that one planet, 2 planets actually, I will say, were in the same orbit but located exactly opposite each other in this star system. And they each represented sort of like the yin yang, sort of opposites of each other. And so because they were both revolving exactly opposite each other around this star, they didn't know of each other's existence for a long time until space travel became possible, and they eventually, were able to interact. And it's a different, it's an interesting, at least parable, if not truth, about duality and this idea of not only being separate from unity, God, the divine, love as universal love and love that is all that is, but also separated from this other side of yourself, this other aspect, this completely opposite aspect of all things in many ways, is the way the story went that I heard. And so you can kind of see how that relates to the I Ching and the way that that Lao Tzu looked at the way that duality interacts and comes together. And as much as those two planets in the Antares system may have been quite diverse, I believe Earth is even more diverse. And so it becomes even more important for us to look for ways, look for systems, look for analogies, metaphors, whatever we need, some kind of sacred geometry structure for us to have these different sides of everything come together, because they truly can. I've mentioned improvisation before, the concept of the yes and. So whatever you are partial to, whatever your preferences are great for you. And it doesn't mean that you can't allow and accept other people in the way that they are, their preferences, and their points of view. And so by adopting this philosophy of improvisation, we say, yes, I can be this way, and yes, you can be that way. And maybe there's some overlap, and maybe not, but whatever that might be, we can accept it, and we can come together sometimes and part ways at other times. And also recognize that we are all one in the divine, in source, in love. And that acceptance has its own kind of love. So it's a beautiful thing when we can recognize that each of us is just a slightly different expression of the divine, and that we are truly never separate from it. So what I believe happened when, I guess at some point in Vedic astrology, when they decided that Antares was the star of war, at least one of them, they were potentially seeing one of the lower expressions of that particular gate, the ninth gate, or at least maybe it wasn't that gate at that time, because the sidereal zodiac does follow the precession of the equinoxes, whereas these gates do not. So whatever gate it was, it doesn't matter, but there must have been some aspect of that star that was being expressed at that time that represented something lower, or at least something in contrast to what the people or person experiencing it thought was good and right and what was needed at that time. And there was a higher expression always possible. It just either wasn't seen or at least wasn't accepted at that time. And we are ascending right now. I believe many of us, if not most of us, are already in the fourth dimension. And my definition of the fourth dimension has to do with manifestations becoming more and more quickly as we focus on them, as we tune into those feelings that we really want to experience. And I talked about that a lot last week, so definitely check out that last video. But we're not quite at that point where we recognize the level of unity that would be associated with the fifth dimension, although I believe the third, fourth, and fifth all have elements of the physical and of duality. Still, the fifth has, more of an association with unity. We're a bit more of a collective once we reach that point. So we're not quite there yet, but the fourth dimension, we are beginning to see manifestations coming more quickly. And just, be careful, because if you are tuning into focusing on duality, focusing on conflict, focusing on war, which is why I'm saying so much about how I don't believe that Antares is the star of war, that is what you're going to manifest. And it is going to come more quickly now. So choose to focus on peace. Choose to focus on the beautiful aspects of this place in the sky. Scorpio, I know many people have different thoughts and feelings about that sign if you're familiar with it. Some people may think of it as a bad sign, but I don't. I think transformation is a beautiful thing. I believe all aspects and all places in the sky can be absolutely beautiful and can have that higher expression. And like I've mentioned before, if you're curious about the higher expressions of each and every one of these gates, Richard Rudd has a great body of work called The Gene Keys, and there are lots of people who are talking about that and putting that out there. I'm just contributing my own perspective as it relates to human design and the way that I believe these need to overlap. So the ninth gate in particular, Richard Rudd associates it with inertia as sort of the lower aspect. And I think it's determination that's the higher. But basically, it does speak about recognizing what it is that we are creating in our reality, what it is that we are focusing upon, and especially the feeling. The ninth gate is located in the sacral center, so it does have something to do with this most powerful motor center, produces a lot of energy when it's defined. As you can see this week, it is not. Excuse me. But many of us, up to about 70% of us, do have it defined in our birth chart. And with that center, with it being so powerful and producing so much energy, it can come in two different ways, a higher and a lower aspect as well. It can come in this warm, fuzzy energy that just makes everyone kind of excited and motivated, or it can come in the form of anger as well. So focus on the good feelings and always remember to ground. If you're feeling too much energy, if you're around someone who has some energy going and perhaps you're amplifying it because you have an open center, open centers are white, then doing a grounding meditation, looking back at some of those videos where I've done that with you, and I might do it again today in a bit, helps us to release any energy that we no longer need or no longer serves us, and then bring up that stable energy from Mother Earth. So that I will be channeling a message from Gaia, Mother Earth, in a moment. But to touch upon this channel, now that we've covered the ninth gate and the star of Antares, these two gates are both located in Capricorn, according to the sidereal zodiac. And like I said, connect the root center to the emotional center. So with this being connected to the root, that is another connection to Gaia. When a channel is completely defined, it's colored in red, black, or some combination of those. And it means that the centers on either end are defined as well. So you can see in this chart that the root center is the brown square at the bottom, defined, and the emotional center on the right, the triangle, is also brown. Like I said, open centers are always white. So this in human design is known as a tribal channel. I don't like that term, so I know it is offensive to some people, Native Americans in particular. So I prefer to speak of it as a theme of family, chosen or otherwise. And in particular, I've heard that this channel is associated with marriage. So that definitely associates with family as well. With it being connected to the root center is also a motor center, not quite as powerful as the sacral center. But if you have an open or white root center in your birth chart, you may feel not only a little more energy this week, but the root center is also a pressure center. So that's what makes it a little different from the other motors. It just has a little bit more of a pressure feeling. And people who have this center open and are around someone with it defined tend to feel almost a little bit manic sometimes. Just they are some of the most productive people around. But then once they've run off that energy that they're amplifying and gotten all kinds of things done, then they excuse me, I might have some landscapers coming by. I might have to pause this, but we'll see. Once the people have run off that amplified energy with that center open, they tend to crash and really need a lot of rest afterwards. One moment. Okay. I've also spoken a lot in previous videos. Like I said, we're going to get through all these channels that are connected to the emotional center probably first in this series, but it is defined with this channel obviously this week. And if your emotional center is open, you may be feeling a little more empathic than even you may typically. You may amplify those emotions. And so again, grounding helps with that. The emotional center is a motor center as well. So it can make you want to avoid conflict sometimes, avoid uncomfortable truths sometimes, because for you to amplify those truths is to amplify the emotions associated with them. And if there's any discomfort at all, any sadness, any anger, any grief, then you're going to feel it even more acutely. But that has its own gift. All of these things have their own gift. And amplifying emotions in particular has the gift of helping us to identify them, helping us to put names to them, and helping us to really see what we actually want to feel. And so I encourage all of you, whether you have this center or either of these centers defined or open, to spend more time, not only this week, but in your lives in general, identifying those things that you can feel appreciation for, those things that you can find gratitude for. Myself this week, I had been sort of uncomfortable with the really sudden hot weather, and I had prayed for some cooler weather, as well as I started getting up earlier in the morning to walk my dog, and I just really appreciated that time when it was nice and cool still. And I succeeded in, some of you may question whether it was really just in the forecast or not, but I succeeded in getting a really nice cool morning yesterday when I walked. In fact, I kind of wished I had a jacket. But there was a nice breeze going, and it stayed at least 10 degrees cooler than it had been all day, 15, 20 degrees cooler in the earlier part of the day. So I send thanks and gratitude for that in hopes that I will help to co-create more beautiful, moderate weather as needed and as wished for. One other thing about this channel is that it does connect us to nature as well. So look for that theme this week. And in addition to being associated with family, chosen or otherwise, like I said, we can sometimes accept animals as part of our family. And we do sort of need to grow our definition of family to include not only different cultures, but the entire population of the earth as much as we can. And that does include, of course, animals. So look out for those things that you can appreciate in nature this week. Just this morning, I saw, for the first time in a very long time, more than a year, much more than a year, I believe, a little inchworm, and it looked a lot like an earthworm, which I've seen plenty of. Thankfully, I appreciate them too. But just inching across the sidewalk, it was just such a, not necessarily a beautiful creature, but it just looked miraculous to me to be able to move so quickly as being such a tiny thing. And I still appreciated it. And I saw my first dragonfly of the season just a day or two ago, as well as before that, fortunately, seeing several damselflies, which I love. So, speaking of nature and Mother Earth, let's tune into Gaia and see what she has to share with us about the energies this week. So I invite you to join me in closing your eyes and taking a few deep breaths. So Gaia wants to elaborate more on the concept of diversity. As I mentioned, the 64 hexagrams are a direct parallel of the codons of amino acids, the building blocks for life. And so by recognizing the gift in each and every one of those hexagrams, gates, and channels, and centers, we are truly embracing the wonderful gift of diversity. And there are many levels upon which this plays out. The most microscopic level is that of probiotics. You may have other words for those. But recognizing that we need a certain amount of diversity in our guts. Not only does a diverse microbiome within our bodies help us to digest better, but it also helps our immune system and can even help, digestion is tied to so many things. And there is an intelligence within each part of our body, each center, each chakra, that having a nice, diverse microbiome within us helps our intelligence as well. So there's that level of diversity. Next would be the diversity of living beings with discrete bodies, animals, plants, and just appreciating that diversity. We don't need so many pesticides or herbicides. If there are a few weeds that are starting to take over that weren't originally here, perhaps you can pull them by hand quite easily. And it's okay if you don't completely eradicate them. But only those that really push out the diversity those are the only ones where there is really a need to even do that much. Most of the diversity that occurs through what some people might even call weeds is needed and beneficial. Dandelions in particular are one of the first flowers to bloom that provide food for bees. And even though they weren't originally native to the place where I live, they don't push out other plants, and they provide so much for not only bees but our own bodies. They're good for our livers, have a lot of nutrients. And so look for the gift in those things that you might see as weeds out there. Even certain insects. Mosquitoes provide food for birds. And so we can appreciate the gift of citronella, which comes from the geranium plant, centigeranium, and welcome those mosquitoes to be food for birds or whatever purpose is served best by them. And the next level of diversity has to do with the many different cultures and races on Earth. We have experienced an influence from many different star systems throughout our history as humans. And that is why we are so diverse, more diverse than many other planets and star systems out there. And so that has presented one of the bigger challenges for us as a species, as well as the potential for great gifts. If only we can truly come to a place of appreciation for that diversity. And only when we are able to do that will we then, as a species, as an entire population, as a civilization, best be able to welcome the wonderful, benevolent extraterrestrials that have things to offer us. I mentioned in a previous video that there are not only beings from other planets and star systems, but other dimensions as well that can seem either as aliens potentially, or if they don't have physical bodies, we may perceive them as angels. Even some of the extraterrestrial species that we have come to possibly associate with bad things, not all of them are actually bad. For example, reptilians. There were some at other times that have done bad things on Earth, but there are also extraterrestrial beings that may resemble reptilians and have nothing but our best interests at heart. And so we need to not only be open to accepting those benevolent beings, but also to forgiving those malevolent beings as they too begin to evolve. And by focusing upon those benevolent aspects, those gifts, even fear, we did evolve with a reptilian influence to have reptilian parts of our brain. So we have part of that within us as well. And fear serves a purpose sometimes. It helps us to get to a safe place if truly needed. But we need to continue to evolve, because sometimes that fear happens when we don't actually need it, out of habit. And so not only do we need to find those things that are wonderful and worthy of our gratitude in the present moment, but even from our past. We can find those gifts, we can find those genetics and the gifts in our own bodies, and find the higher expression that not only have we experienced and expressed before, but we can do so now as well. Had a couple interruptions today with the landscape equipment, so we apologize for that. We believe they're aerating, so hopefully no herbicides or pesticides today. Deep breath. And as Amy brought up before, don't forget to ground. Feel the sun come down through the top of your head, down through your body, out through your root and your feet, into Mother Earth. Release what is no longer needed to me, to Gaia. And allow only that which nourishes you to come back up into your body. This is a wonderful way to feel the circulation of this diversity in ways that are gentle, benevolent, accepting, and recognizing the true unity of love in all of it. One more deep breath, let it go. Send love out to not only everyone else on Earth, but all of those star systems out there who have ever meant us well. In our ascension, we help their ascension as well. Thank you so much for joining me. Namaste, beloveds. Thank you for watching, subscribing, liking, sharing, and clicking the bell button to be notified when the new weekly message